Hey everybody. All right, it's been a busy week here at GR Research. We've had lots of projects going on, lots of orders we're trying to handle, lots of speakers that we've torn into. First things first, yes, I did get a haircut. A girl that I work out with at the gym looked at me and she said, "Dude, you got a mullet. You got a full-fledged mullet." And she's right. The sides just, they're slow growing. The back was just going. And she said, come by and let me fix that for you. She said, let me put Viv on it. Let Viv give you a haircut. So I came by. She trimmed off some of the back. We'll let it even out. Now that it's evened out a little bit more, I'll grow my hair out. We'll see what happens. Oh, and this. My wife already said something about this. No, I'm not a Bigfooter. A friend of mine went to this location here, the HOH Rainforest or Ho Rainforest, whatever that is, and they're in Washington, and sent me back as a souvenir a Bigfoot t-shirt because she knows I like watching Finding Bigfoot and some of those paranormal shows and different things. 'Cause I like a mystery. I like a good mystery. I don't know if there's a Bigfoot or not a Bigfoot, but a lot of people seem to have said they've seen Bigfoot. Not going to discount anything somebody says they said. That's like saying, hey, I listened to this speaker and I didn't like it. Can't dispute that. It is what it is. I do like watching Finding Bigfoot. I call it not Finding Bigfoot because they never find Bigfoot. They just get a bunch of whoops and hollers and wood knocks and something to keep you riveted to the show, I guess. I just wish one time some ape would come running out of the forest and just grab Renee and drag her off into the woods once to make it interesting, but that never happens. So let's talk about speakers. Okay. Like I said, busy week. I had the little Klipsch speaker that was in here that was the center channel that I just worked on. That was, what was that center channel? It was an RP25C. RP25C. And it measured pretty well from the factory. I'll throw up some of the factory measurements and look at it again. It only had a little bit of a dipped area there around 3,000 hertz or so, but pretty smooth. The top end was dropped out of it. The vertical off axis was really good, and we noted that as you move horizontally, because of the driver spacing, it looked bad if you got more than 15 or 20 degrees off axis. By that point, the response was a mess. So I looked at that one to see what I could do with it, and surprisingly, did quite a bit with it. I thought it was smooth before. Now it's really smooth. Here's the new frequency response on this thing. As you can see, pretty balanced. And the crossover response looks good. The drivers rolled into each other really well. Crossover point is about 2,700 hertz. Spectral decay, super clean. Impedance is now more balanced than it was. The vertical off axis still looks great as you move up or down. Very consistent. Couldn't fix the horizontal off axis. That's just a physical limitation of the acoustic centers of one woofer versus the other. And if you get a little further off axis, that goes to pieces. Couldn't fix that. But what I did do was try and figure out a way to offer this upgrade and offer it as an upgrade and to keep the price point down as low as possible, because I know that's not an expensive speaker at all, but it had good responding drivers. The drivers were pretty smooth, so it didn't take a lot of parts and it wasn't expensive. And I did a version of this where it's just all air core inductors like these you see here from ERSI, and all ERSI polycaps and link resistors, and a Gen 2 sonic cap bypass cap, which is a 0.1 microfarad bypass cap on all of the tweeter caps. And that with one pair of tube connectors, new wiring, and a sheet of no-res, and it really needed the no-res, it came to 130 bucks. So 130 bucks, not too shabby to upgrade that speaker. If you want to put sonic caps in the tweeter circuit, which will bring the detail levels and clarity up another notch, you're looking at 178 for that model, and that gets you everything you need. And that one turned out pretty well. Next was, let's talk about this little Elac, because it was kind of in the same boat. This one from the factory also measured really well. We talked about how smooth it was. There was a little bit of a dipped area there at 3K, not very much. And the impedance was balanced. Everything about this one measured really well. Again, the off axis, you were good to about 20. Once you get past 20 degrees off axis, the acoustic centers of the drivers are such that the time delay is going to create an out of phase situation. So there's no fixing that. But overall, pretty good. And so I got digging into it thinking, I'm just going to replicate this factory crossover. It was designed really well. Why alter anything? So I started looking at it and realized there was one resistor that was in line with the woofers. I want to say it was this 1.7 ohm resistor in line with the woofers, and I didn't like that. I don't like using a resistor in line with a low frequency driver, and this was a 5-watt resistor, so chances are kind of high that that one's going to burn up if you start sending a lot of low information to those drivers. So I took that out of the circuit. Didn't like that. And the sensitivity, if you look at it from the factory, it was just almost a flat line there for quite a ways at 90 dB. So now if you look at what I did with it, you notice it came up just a little bit. It's more around 91, between 90 and 91 dB. So it came up a solid half of a dB just by getting that resistor out of the path. That meant I had to bring the tweeter level up a little bit to match it. The crossover point's probably not too far off from where it was. It looks like it crosses about 2500, and it's even flatter now than it was. The little bit of a dipped area at 3K's come up just a hair. The spectral decay again is still super smooth. If we look at the vertical off axis, it's still great. Not only is it great, when we take this mesh off and you start getting off axis of this tweeter a little bit, some of that dipped area at the top end starts coming back up. You get off axis, I think there's still a little bit of cancellation going on there in the throat that is only there if you're directly in line with it. As soon as you get off axis a little bit, that starts to fill in. So at a little bit in the vertical off axis, that comes up and the whole thing is super flat. I mean, really smooth. I bypassed that resistor that was on there with a small cap to try and bring that top end up a little bit. I would have been able to bring it up more, but the resistor value is pretty small now with that resistor out of the woofer circuit. So there's not a lot of attenuation on the tweeter. So I wasn't able to bring that top end up as much as I'd like. There's not that much there to bring up, because basically what we're doing is you're bringing everything else down. And when you bring everything else down, you bypass that resistor to bring the top backups. In other words, you're not bringing the very top end up, but you're not bringing the top end down, but you're bringing everything else down. So it tilts it a little bit, but because, like I said, it didn't have a lot to work with there, it didn't change it much. Impedance is still pretty close to where it was. This speaker is right at 9-10 ohm, all down the lower region, and it's an easy load to drive. So piece of cake driving this thing. The little upgrade worked out really well. On the crossover on this one, there was just one cap in the tweeter circuit. So that one's a Sonic cap. There's just one cap in the woofer circuit. It's a little ERSI cap. There's two inductors. They're both air core ERSI inductors. Good quality. Big jump from what was in the signal path of the woofer, which was this little bitty iron core inductor with a dental floss gauge, to this big air core inductor. That's going to help open up that vocal region quite a bit. Good quality wire, all to be soldered direct on, high purity copper and polyethylene. This was PVC. This one had, of course, all the push-on connectors that are all made of tin. That's stuff you don't want in the signal path. Replacing the bonding posts with a set of tube connectors, which is a pure copper tube. So a lot of things there going on to make the signal path a lot cleaner. So all new crossover parts, new wiring, one pair of tube connectors, and a sheet of no-res to tighten up the box. There's a brace here, I think. Tighten up the box, $135. So cheap upgrade for this one. Takes it up quite a bit in clarity. Yeah, let's pause while I get that. Okay, next. What happened to that thing? The big SVS Ultra Tower. Well, this is what came out of the SVS Ultra Tower. And what we did was we mapped this thing out and drew out all the crossover components, and they did a pretty good job. They really did. They did a good job on designing this thing. There was a couple of positions there where there was a resistor that was needed in a particular part of the signal path where there's going to be some low frequency signal passing through it. And what they did was they doubled up some 20 watt rated resistors. They used two of them basically to get a 40 watt rated resistor to handle both of those positions, so that was pretty smart. That was well designed. Now of course the parts are, as you see here, these were not no cost spared crossovers. These are the budget level crossover parts. Electrolytic caps, iron core inductors. There was a poly cap on the tweeter and a little air core inductor on the tweeter, but that is it. So what I'm going to do is I've drawn everything out. I have their schematic here. I'm not going to give out the schematic. That's their intellectual property basically, and I'm sure they look at it just like we do. Our crossovers are proprietary. We don't give them out when you ask for our crossovers. If you buy our product, if you buy one of our speakers, you have the right to use that product, and we give that crossover diagram to you. We help you with it, all that stuff, and it only works with our speakers. And so I'm sure they're the same way. They'll be glad to help a customer who owns the product, and in this case, if you're a customer who owns the product, you kind of have the rights to use what's in the product. That's you've purchased that speaker, so you are going to, at some point when I get this finished up, be able to purchase the same crossover. It's still their design. It's just using higher quality parts. It's basically the same as you just going on the board, popping parts off and putting the same value on there of a higher quality. But unfortunately, the higher quality parts are not going to fit on this board. Those big air core inductors, they're pretty huge. In fact, this one's small compared to some of the values that are used on this network here. They're not going to fit on there. You're going to have to point-to-point wire this stuff and probably do a 2-layer board and stack this stuff up in there to get it to work. May have to mount some of the network for the upper drivers up top or something, because it's not going to fit on this space. So kudos to those guys really for doing some pretty nice design work, and they just needed a little finessing there. They just need some higher quality parts, maybe some no res, some tube connectors, new wiring. That wire was, I did find out this is aluminum coated copper wire. Don't know why they didn't just provide copper wire, but that's what it is. And last but not least, this thing. Everybody keeps wanting to know, ooh, Dynaudio, can't wait to see what he does with that Dynaudio. This Dynaudio was a mess. This was not easy to work with. There were issues with this right off the bat. As soon as I shot a frequency response of the woofer, I could already tell that this port had output that was really disrupting the woofer's response. If we look at just the woofer's response and you look at it, this is with and without the port plugged. I plugged the port and a lot of that choppiness smoothed right out, went away. I understand they're trying to get some low frequency extension out of this little box, but putting the port right there on the front of the speaker is not the place to put that port. I mean, it definitely has port noise. It's definitely disrupting the signal. It's causing group delay that you're going to hear. If this is a studio monitor, and that's what this was designed for, that's exactly what you don't want on the studio monitor. You want, if there is going to be a port, you want that thing firing somewhere besides forward. And I understand they're going to a lot of times put this thing up close to a wall for mastering or mixing. They don't really have a lot of room for a port to breathe. It shouldn't have a port anyway. It's better that it's a sealed speaker and that some other speaker, some other driver, some subwoofer is giving you that low frequency. So that's the reason the port's plugged. The other issue I had with it was the tweeter. Man, did I have a tough time with this tweeter. The tweeter's response looked like a little roller coaster. Had a big hump in it. then it dipped down, and it came back up again, and it played down fairly low, but it was so lumpy, it was unusable. And as soon as I looked at it, I thought, man, I know that's a pretty good tweeter. It's got to be all this surface reflection and everything going on here. And I took a big piece of felt and I dropped it over the front of this port here. Didn't do anything. I thought, oh, this thing is a mess. And I started working with it, and there was no fixing it. There was no getting around that. And so I walked away from it. I thought, I'll sleep on it. I'll figure something out. There's got to be a way to flatten out that tweeter's response and get a reasonable response about it. I'm not going to send this thing out there with this big lumpy response. It just doesn't make any sense. So a couple of days into it, it was still sitting there, and I came back to it, and I thought it's got to be surface area. It's got to be surface reflection. And this thing set proud just a little bit of the front baffle. So I put tape all the way around it to do away with a little of that diffraction. That wasn't it. That wasn't what's causing it. So then I just took a big chunk of no-res. It was in a little piece here, and I stuck it on one side and took a measurement. I stuck it on the other side, and I put some on each side. It wasn't the sides that was causing it. So I took that big chunk of no-res and I stuck it right under the tweeter, kind of right across the top of the woofer there, and boom, smooth as glass all the way across. All that surface reflection, all that diffraction is coming off of this woofer frame, and it's coming off of this woofer, and all of that that's below it was completely disrupting the response on the speaker. So then I went and cut a bunch of pieces of no-res up in little pieces. I cut some with 45-degree angle cuts, cut them in different lengths, different widths, started putting them underneath the tweeter and taking measurements. Probably went through 6 or 8 different variations of pieces of foam and settled on this one. This one's about 3 1/4 inches across, 1 inch tall. This yielded the best response, just that one little piece of foam right there. Flatten it right out. Look at the tweeter's response now. If you look at it without that little piece of foam on it, and then this is with the network on it. This is with the final network. Once I was through, I took that off just to see what would happen again, and they're lumpy. And that was with parts on there to correct it, to flatten out the response. So foam back in place, beautiful, nice, smooth roll off. Oh, looks good. Thank you. So what happened then? So with the network I built for this thing, crossed at 2 kHz, nice and smooth. You look at the crossover response. And if we look at the horizontal off axis, as you move one way, it's different than if you move the other way. If you move towards the port, you notice the acoustic centers are off. So as you move this way, the tweeter is moving further away in time than the woofer. So if you look at the horizontal off axis in this direction, it starts to have a little bit of a suck out at the crossover point. If you go in the other direction, if you do off axis that way, it falls off fairly evenly and fairly smooth with just a little bit of a peak around 3200 hertz. So not bad in that direction. Now if you look at the vertical off axis, that means you got the microphone out and you start moving up. It maintains a pretty good vertical off axis. It really has a center axis that's more like this. It's from here to here, you're in phase. It's not here. It's not like if you're within this range, it's in phase. It's if you're within this range, it's in phase. As you start going lower, the time delay between the two, because these are spaced pretty far apart, will start to drop out in the crossover region if you go lower than the woofer. But from on axis and up, nice smooth response. They're in phase really well over that range. So direct on axis frequency response, pretty smooth, pretty smooth. We're plus or minus a dB and a quarter or something all the way across. Impedance curve looks fine, no issues there. Spectral decay is nice and clean. Not bad. Now, what do I think of this little thing? I've never been a fan of this woofer, this type of woofer, the material or the huge voice coil. I know it'll take a lot of power, and if you can put some power on it, it tends to open up. At low power, they are very over-damped sounding. They sound like a little bit like they're playing through a wet rag at low volumes. You have to bring these things up and put some power on them for them to really open up. So they're kind of you get kind of a mixed bag with these things. And I'm probably not going to release a kit per se for these. I don't know that many people that are going to want to convert their powered speaker over to a passive speaker. But we're going to have a little shootout with these, and we're going to see what happens. That's it for this week. You guys please hit the subscribe button, and so you can get notifications of the new videos as they drop, and we'll have more for you guys next week. More's coming, I promise. Some good stuff. And I can't wait to start on cables. Oh, I can't wait to start on cables. See you guys next week.